Could Adolis Garcia be the middle of the order bat the Royals are looking for? We'll talk about it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, some co-hosting, and a little bit of producing as well. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you're going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Well, still no news from the winter meetings that wrapped up either earlier this morning or it was yesterday. I believe it actually was yesterday evening. So no moves were made while the Royals were down at the winter meetings in Dallas, or JJ Picollo having the opportunity to negotiate with other teams, try to strike a deal, to negotiate with free agents. But at least through the first 4 days of this week, nothing came from it. So we'll talk a little bit about what we think about that. Certainly we'll be getting some questions on that from Mailbag Friday, already getting some on Twitter. If you want to send them on YouTube, that's totally fine as well. We're also going to be talking about the Royals Hall of Fame nominations. We did have one commenter on YouTube bring that up. Wanted to wait till a little bit later on in the week, just on the off chance we did have a move to talk about. So since tomorrow's a Mailbag Friday, this is our last typical episode where we go through 3 different segments. Want to make sure I give my thoughts on that, who I think I would be voting for, the 5 I would pick to be into the Royals Hall of Fame, my reasonings for that. That'll be in our second segment of tonight's show. And lastly, it was reported from Annie Rogers of MLB.com that Royals reliever Angel Zerpa is generating some trade interest because some teams out there are viewing him as a starter for their rotation. So should the Royals entertain that? What could they get for somebody like Angel Zerpa, and would he be included in a deal that gets the Royals that middle of the order bat, or maybe a depth piece to come off the bench? But we'll talk about that in the third and final segment of today's episode. But let's go all the way back to segment number 1 here. And something I did want to dive into a few days ago, but I thought it was a little bit more appropriate to talk about likelier candidates than the one we're going to talk about today. And that is Adolis Garcia. I would say that every single morning, my routine is the same in getting ready for work, going over some segment ideas for this podcast. I read through just about every bit of Royals content I can take in, especially during the offseason when you know that it's not a day-to-day thing like it is in the regular season, where you got a game every single day for the most part. Moves can be happening, or you've got just the team to talk about. So I subscribe to Inside the Crown. David Lesky does a phenomenal job. I read articles from Andy Rogers, Jalen Thompson, anything that MLB on ESPN puts out, The Athletic, of course. I try just to make sure there's no outlet I haven't checked for an update on. Maybe it's an opinion, maybe it's a factual statement. I want to make sure I don't miss it. And Adolis Garcia, in the latest edition of Inside the Crown from David Lesky, he's going over the candidates that still could be looked at for the Royals. And I believe, in the one I read this morning, I want to make sure it was today, not the last one that came out, but Adolis Garcia's name had come up, and that it had been put out there before as a part of a rumor. And at first, when I heard that idea pop up, because this was not the first time I had seen it, either it was David Lesky or it was somebody else. Maybe it was on The Athletic. In fact, it might have been The Athletic when it was potential trade candidates and Adolis Garcia was seen as a fit for Kansas City. I kind of just pushed that away just because I didn't think Texas would be in a position to trade him away to save on some payroll. They do have a very expensive payroll, but Adolis Garcia is one of their main guys for the middle of the order. And even coming off of a down year, he's not far removed from being maybe the face of the Texas Rangers in their World Series win. He was a postseason hero for him. He's going to be in numerous home run derbies now for the next couple of years. He was last in and the one that I was at, the All-Star game in Arlington, but certainly known as one of the more prolific power hitters in the sport. He's not running into 50 home runs like Aaron Judge, but I think that it is very well known that he is a premier power hitter. He is a big-time home run strikeout guy. He doesn't really walk a lot. Last year was a down year for him. And I do think metrics-wise, matched up somewhat comparably to Hunter Renfroe, which I think would turn a lot of people off to a deal like this. But the only reason I'm circling back to this and bringing it up is JJ Picollo had mentioned in one of Andy Rogers' article that power is something they're looking for. And Adolis Garcia has that, where the guys that we have brought up before don't really have that type of pop or are known for power. I brought up yesterday that Taylor Ward is somebody that I think has sneaky power. He ran into 25 home runs this past season. He's had 20-plus home runs before. But when you say the name Taylor Ward or you're facing him in the lineup, you're not fearing that he's going yard. You're not fearing that he's going to run into one and put it 440 feet from home plate. He's got that capability. I think he's an all-around great player and would be a better fit for the Royals than Adolis Garcia. But if the Royals are looking for pure power and you directly state power is what you're looking for, this is somebody that would fit that mold, because Adolis Garcia is known for power. When you are facing Adolis Garcia, you are thinking he's either running into this one or he's going to be striking out. He just has that feel to him. He is the old school type power hitter where it's a strikeout or it's a home run. You would like for him to walk a little bit more, but he is a free swinger. And last year, I think for a Rangers lineup that couldn't stay healthy, a Rangers lineup that underachieved, that got exploited a little bit more. He looked more so like the Adolis Garcia that the Cardinals had given up on, that they didn't feel like he would get to the level that he was in that 2023 season with Texas and even the year before that. But are the Royals a team that would make a move like that, where they look at their hole in the middle of the order and they feel like Adolis Garcia would be that answer? I think it would make the lineup flashier. It would bring back that presence that Jorge Soler had, where, you know, when he was hot, when he was running into him, he was a very feared hitter in that lineup. When things were not going well, he was a black hole in that lineup. And I think Adolis Garcia would bring the exact same thing to the Royals. But this, to me, comes down to more so things about Texas than it does the Royals. Texas has now been aggressive in back-to-back days. They go out there and they bring in Nathan Eovaldi, or they bring back Nathan Eovaldi on a big-time $75 million deal. They acquire Jake Berger. And I think the acquisition of Jake Berger makes this more likely of a deal to happen than it was, let's say, a few weeks ago. But I'm not going to go as far to say that it's a lot better or has a much higher chance than it did before the Jake Berger trade. But Jake Berger is somebody who's a DH. And Adolis Garcia does play the outfield, but he was a disaster out there in the outfield for the Rangers this past season. I think they would like for him to be a DH. Now you can't really do that because Jake Berger is going to be that DH. Is Nathaniel Lowe, right, the first baseman / DH for the Rangers, an option to look at? I just think it goes back to having that connection, right? Chris Young and the Royals, Dayton Moore, of course, as well. They could work out a deal, but again, you look at the last time a deal was made and the Rangers got a Aroldis Chapman. They won a World Series from it, so it's not like they're going to apologize for a deal like this. But the Royals got Cole Reagans in that deal. So if the Royals are calling and they feel like, hey, you know, Adolis Garcia, a down year, he's 31 years old, he's heading in the wrong direction, we'll take him off your hands and we'll try him out in our lineup, but we'll give you some pitching depth. I could see the Rangers and Chris Young going, no, we're not doing that this time around. We feel like Adolis Garcia can bounce back. And that's what I think I'm leaning a little bit more into. Not saying it's impossible, but in the same conversations that I've had about Taylor Ward and the Angels, I've gone back to, they seem like they want to contend. They seem like they want to compete, and subtracting at this point doesn't really make sense for them. That's why when it was put out 2 days ago, I think, with Mark Feinstein, maybe it was yesterday, about, you know, actually it was Tuesday. So now it is 2 days removed from that. Of the Angels were close to trading an outfielder. We haven't heard anything since. And he mentioned Taylor Ward as an option, but since nothing's come from it, maybe that deal fell through, or they never were entertaining any sort of trade. But to, I guess, backpedal on that a little bit, it makes me think the Angels are going to try to contend, and trading Taylor Ward goes against that. When it comes to the Rangers, I can't say that about the Angels and then just completely disregard it when it comes to the Rangers. The Rangers are going to try to make up for a lost year in 2023 or 2024, excuse me. They had a letdown offensively. They couldn't stay healthy. The rotation couldn't stay healthy. And even though Adolis Garcia had a down year, he's somebody you roll the dice with again and go, man, if he can channel the 2023 version of himself, run into 40 home runs again, drive in 110, that's something that we need in our lineup. It's not something we want. We have to have it in our lineup if we're going to return back to the postseason or, win the American League West and put ourselves in a good spot in the bracket. So for the Royals to call about him, I think that price would be a little bit expensive, even though it was a down year for him and he's on the wrong side, or excuse me, the right side of 30, but the wrong side, of course, of the late 20s and being 31 years old. I know it's not really the correct way of using that phrase, but you get what I mean. He's 31 years old. You bring him in for 1 year. If he gives you what he did last year, I don't really think that's a huge upgrade over what you had in the outfield. It was a bad outfield, an outfit that couldn't stay healthy, didn't have a lot of pop. He would solve a lot of those answers, but right now, I just don't know how I could see Texas making these moves and then unloading one of their key players in the middle of their lineup. But if J.J. Picollo is looking for power, Adolis Garcia matches that description a little bit better than the guys that we brought up in the last 2 episodes here of Locked On Royals. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about those Royals Hall of Fame nominees, who we would pick and why we would pick them. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our first sponsor today in FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. For my pick, a fun game on Sunday, 3:25 kick, the Lions and the Bills. I like the Lions to win this one. Not going to bet against them with the way they've played at home. I know their one loss was to Tampa Bay in Detroit, but I like them in the spot against the Bills, who are coming off that loss to LA. So give me the money line on the Detroit Lions. Well, I had this brought up on YouTube, and I do appreciate this this listener, this follower, whatever you want to call yourself. Kind of bringing up the idea about the Royals Hall of Fame nominations, the guys that were out there, and who I would pick, because it is big news, I think, for the offseason. And since it's been a very quiet and boring winter meetings, I do apologize for this coming a little bit later on in the week, but I usually make these segments in the morning and then record them after work. So I was sort of saving some time for the Royals to make a move. And then once everything quieted down or they left the winter meetings without any deal in place, I would go over the Hall of Fame talk. So even though it's coming on Thursday, we will get our thoughts to all of you guys there that were curious of who I would be picking and why I would be picking these guys for the Royals Hall of Fame class. So if you did miss this, the 2025 ballot will include Carlos Beltran, Billy Butler, Johnny Damon, Wade Davis, Gerard Dyson, Alex Gordon, Kelvin Herrera, Joaquin Soria, and Yordano Ventura. I think this is a phenomenal group, and I think that there are going to be a lot of votes for just about everybody on this list, because there's not one person here that I don't think was just not a fan favorite at some point. I think every single one of these guys were a fan favorite at one point, whether it be for a month, whether it be for a season, whether it be for multiple seasons, they were fan favorites. And I've always believed this with the Royals Hall of Fame, that it's not necessarily about the numbers all the time. Like for Cooperstown and the Baseball Hall of Fame, to me, it's not about what type of guy you were, or if you were the nicest player of all time. It's purely numbers based. Call me shallow on that, but I am somebody that believes if you're going to put a player in Cooperstown, it has to mean they told the story of baseball, right? I think the most controversial take is, Barry Bonds being left out of the Hall of Fame or Pete Rose being left out of the Hall of Fame. And should they be in? Should they not be in? I think that, baseball felt like their legacy was tarnished or they tarnished it themselves. But to me, I look at it as I at least would like something there in Cooperstown so you can tell the story of baseball. If you put Barry Bonds in there and, 756, the home run ball. And I look at it as you can't tell the story of baseball without telling the story of Barry Bonds. Same thing for about Pete Rose. You may not put them in the same category as what all these other players are because, maybe some of those guys had the perfect clean image. They never had any issues and they had a storied career. I totally get that. But for a Hall of Fame and for a museum, if you will, I think that you need some of those guys in there to tell the story of baseball, whether it was good or bad for the game. You got to be able to tell the story. And I think for the Royals Hall of Fame, it's not so much about the numbers all the time. I think it's more so about fan popularity, that when you're walking through the Royals Hall of Fame and you point out somebody, they've got a plaque there and you're able to talk about them. And I think with every single one of these candidates, you could do that. I could have extensive conversations about every single one of those guys and pretty much bring up the fact every single time that they were beloved by the fan base. Now, there certainly were times where, fans were ticked off at Carlos Beltran or they were ticked off at Johnny Damon because they went on to other organizations and had a lot of success where the Royals were left in the dust. But I think of these options right here, of the 9 guys out there, the 5 I would pick would go as follows. I think I got Carlos Beltran on my ballot here. I think I'm going to put Billy Butler on my ballot as well. I think I will have Wade Davis on my ballot, and I think I'll have Alex Gordon and Joaquin Soria. Now, that leaves out Kelvin Herrera, Gerard Dyson, Yordano Ventura, Johnny Damon. I think Carlos Beltran is pretty self-explanatory. In the early 2000s, and I also want to tie in Bobby Witt Jr. here. Bobby Witt Jr., when he was breaking all these records, first-year player, second-year player, third-year player, like, he was shattering a lot of the records and stats that Carlos Beltran had. And the only thing that sucked for Carlos Beltran, aside from maybe a few years, he was just on bad teams. He was on teams that weren't very good. He had great numbers. And in fact, a lot of Royals guys like a David DeJesus, great numbers on terrible teams. And when you're on terrible teams, you kind of get washed over. You get left in the past. And that's why I think when it comes to the 14 and 15 guys, like Gerard Dyson's going to have a really good chance because Gerard Dyson was one of the most beloved players on that team. He wasn't a starter, but everybody remembers him swiping third in the wild card game. Everybody remembers the tremendous catches that he had. The catch he had against Tampa Bay in that day game. I think it was actually the next day after Alex Gordon had hurt himself at the wall. He had the inside the park that same night. He replaced Alex Gordon. He had great catches in the postseason. I remember game 2 in Anaheim. He guns down. Who was it? Might have been Cole Calhoun at third base in the 8th inning. Like, Gerard Dyson had memorable moments. He was never a starter, but he was somebody that I think every fan looks back in a positive way with. Like, I think Gerard Dyson is somebody that will have a chance to get in. Same thing with Kelvin Herrera. Like, Kelvin Herrera was not the best arm in HDH. In 14 and 15, he was never the closer, but he was elite at what he did. He was the setup guy, and he's going to get a lot of votes. Yordano Ventura obviously is going to get a lot of votes because of what happened, and I have no doubt in my mind, I've never wavered on this. Yordano Ventura is somebody that will, I think, next to, let's say, Bo Jackson, be one of the biggest what-ifs in Royals history. I think that he would have been an excellent number 1 for years to come. I think when you face the Royals and you were talking about an ace, Yordano Ventura would have been that. I think there's a better way to honor him, more so than just putting him in the Royals Hall of Fame. I think that whether it be at Kauffman Stadium or a new stadium down the road, he gets his own plaque, and it's somewhere out there near the Royals Hall of Fame. It doesn't need to be a statue, but a plaque that is very well known. Maybe his jersey's right next to it, that when people are walking by, you can take young kids who never watched him pitch or don't even know his name and tell the story of Yordano Ventura. I think you can memorialize him in that way, and I would really love to see that. I would love to see that type of honor for Yordano Ventura. But when it comes to the Royals Hall of Fame, I think it has to be about fan popularity. I also think it has to be about the numbers. And I think with Carlos Beltran, that's kind of a non-negotiable for me. I think his numbers were by far and away good enough to be in the Royals Hall of Fame. Billy Butler was just the definition of consistency, right? I think for a long time, he was one of the few players that you would feel proud about when talking about a bad Royals team. Like him and Gordon were the guys that I felt happiest for in 2014 because they had suffered through just bad baseball for years and years and years, low attendance. And then finally, when the city embraced them in 13 and 14 and 15, 13 and 14 more so for Butler because he wasn't here in 2015. But, he was somebody that stuck around. He was never traded. He stuck it out in Kansas City, and he was very consistent. And I think a lot of fans out there loved that for Billy Butler. And, some walk-off home runs he had, stole second base and game, game 3 of the ALDS against the Angels as well. Some big hits in the wild card game. Like you could just count on Billy to do that. There were some double play balls as well, but I think for Billy, just one of those guys that I think if you grew up watching the Royals from 2005 on, you very much liked him. You had a Billy Butler jersey or Billy Butler jersey. So Butler's on my list as well. Wade Davis, kind of like Beltran. I don't think I need to really explain myself. He may go down as the best Royals in just pure stuff, dominance. He may not only go down as the best Royals closer of all time for a single season, but maybe the best closing season, I don't want to say ever, but certainly top 5, because there are guys that have come close to that. But Wade Davis, I mean, the feeling of him taking the mound in the 9th inning or the 8th inning in 2014 is unhittable. I mean, it was just, you'd blink and the inning was over. That's how good he was. And that carried on into 16 as well. I was so upset when they traded him to Chicago just for Jorge Soler alone. I was hoping for a bigger return, but no, Wade Davis on my list as well. Joakim Soria, same thing for Johnny Damon and Beltran and guys that were so consistent, so good, but on bad teams. Joakim Soria, the exact same thing there. Joakim Soria in the late 2000s, early 2010s was locked down, right? Welcome to the Juggle was his entrance. And the few times the Royals had a lead late in a lot of those seasons, he was locked down as well. I mean, could run it up to mid-90s, high 90s, had the devastating curveball. And then I really hate that he had that second stint in Kansas City that really didn't work out. But I don't think I'm going to forget what he did in the late 2000s, early 2010s. He was a Rule 5 pick, really made a career for himself and made a lot of money in doing so. So Joakim Soria, again, I think because he was a closer, that's why I give him the nod over Kelvin Herrera, who was just a closer in 2018 until he was traded to Washington in May or June, whatever it was. Joakim Soria is on my list. And Alex Gordon again. I mean, Alex Gordon, like Butler, consistent, multiple-time All-Star, maybe the best defending left fielder the game has ever seen, a Platinum Glove winner, Game 1 World Series home run, the Game 7 moment where he could have scored, but it was a triple. Gordo, like Butler, like so many Royals fans that grew up watching him in the mid-2000s into 2015, 16, 17, like he's one of the guys you recognized. And I know that's aging some people out there. It's certainly aging myself. I mean, I didn't grow up watching the Royals in the 80s and early 90s. I wasn't born yet. So my timeline, my, fandom started with all these guys playing for the Royals. So that's why I love being involved in talking about this and giving my picks. It's not that I don't think those other guys are deserving, because I really do believe they are. And my list may be way off as well. But I'm curious of everybody else's thoughts. Let me know in the YouTube comments. Let me know in the Twitter comments. I got Carlos Beltran, Billy Butler, Wade Davis, Alex Gordon, Joakim Soria for my picks for the Royals Hall of Fame. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, Angel Zerpa generating some trade interest. Should the Royals pull the trigger, or should they bring Angel Zerpa back for their bullpen? We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to give a shout out to our final sponsor today in Gametime. I'm already looking ahead to 2025, circling some weekends in which I'll be able to travel and go see the Royals play. Already got something in the works right now, but definitely going to try to be more active on the road this season, giving you guys some podcasts from different cities, giving you guys some videos, some look-ins from other stadiums, because I think a lot of people enjoyed that last season with our trips down to Arlington for both the Royals-Rangers series and the All-Star game. Had a trip to San Francisco as well. That might be in the works for this upcoming season, but I'm going to do so over at Gametime. It's my favorite app to use when buying tickets. So here's what you need to do. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. The terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? It is game time. The last thing I want to dive into before we have our Mailbag Friday tomorrow, so this will be our final typical segment of the week where we break it down into 3 segments. Tomorrow, it's all going to be about you. Whatever questions you have, we're going to be sure to get to them. But Angel Zerpa generating some trade interest from teams that are wanting to move him back to the rotation. If you can recall, Angel Zerpa was somebody that the Royals tried in the rotation for a little bit as early as 2023. But last year, it was all about pitching out of the bullpen. He is a sinker ball specialist, a ground ball specialist. It was running it up there to as high as 99, was staying consistent between 96 and 98 toward the middle part of the season. Went through a bit of a rough patch, and that was in August. But in September, when they called him back up, seemed to have fixed a few things and then was pretty damn good in the postseason, aside from like 1 or 2 outings. But for the most part, Matt Quatraro trusted him in front of some big crowds in the postseason. I thought he did his job to the best of his capabilities. And I would be excited to see Angel Zerpa in 2025 pitching out of the Royals bullpen. But I will also counter with this point. Relievers have that short shelf life. I remember I had one commenter disagree with me on that, where, if you've got a good reliever, you need to make sure that you can really develop him to the best of his abilities, and then, try to really strengthen your bullpen with a lot of those guys. And I think Angel Zerpa could be a very strong piece for this bullpen in 2025. But I have been down that route before, where I've been high on a reliever, and then the very next year, they torpedo. They don't even come close to what they did the previous year. I did that with Carlos Hernandez. When the Royals traded Scott Barlow, I thought Carlos Hernandez is the guy that you plug into the closer's role, and then in 2024, you're not even worrying about finding a closer because he's the guy you want. And he never recovered after Scott Barlow was traded. Like, he thrived in that 7th inning role, that 8th inning role, and then when Barlow was gone, everything went south for Carlos Hernandez. And in 2024, he wasn't very good. And it goes back to show you, when you've got peak value for a reliever and teams are calling about that reliever, you really need to think long and hard if you think that that guy is going to be a big piece for you the following season. Because the Royals are looking for that middle of the order bat. The Royals are looking for depth off the bench. And the Royals also have an abundance of arms that they can give a look in 2025. I mean, it was about a month and a half ago, I want to say, maybe I got my dates all wrong, they added Evan Sisk to the 40-man roster. Evan Sisk had a really good year in AAA, and I think that ceiling-wise, Evan Sisk has about the same ceiling as Angel Zerpa. He doesn't have a spot right now in this bullpen because it's too crowded. If you had a team calling, and this is why I think it's important to hear somebody out. If you have a team calling about a reliever to turn him into a starter, I would have to think that return is better than if they were just trading for Angel Zerpa, the reliever. Because if they were just trading for the reliever, I'm not sure you're getting an everyday player or even somebody that could be your swing starter, right? But if a team is thinking of Angel Zerpa that highly, of we like what he can do in the bullpen, we feel like it can translate to the rotation, the Royals are in a good spot where they can leverage that and say, well, if you think he's a starter, we're going to need a little bit more because you are trading for the starter version of Angel Zerpa, not the 6th inning guy that we had in the postseason this past year. So that's where I think the Royals can leverage it a little bit. And if they're confident that somebody can take that role, which it's not a massive role that he was in, right? I mean, I could say right now that somebody like a Steven Cruz, somebody like a James MacArthur, again, that's going to be an unpopular take, but somebody could take that 6th inning role. John Schreiber could as well, or Sam Long could, right? They have a lot of lefties in that bullpen, a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and somebody's going to be the odd man out. If you get good value for Angel Zerpa, I think you do pull the trigger. Am I going to be disappointed if they don't? Absolutely not, because you've got a left-handed pitcher who can throw strikes, who throws mid to upper 90s, and when locating well, he does exactly what you need him to do. And when Angel Zerpa was thriving, and I want to see him throw that slider a little bit more if he's still in Kansas City in 2025, because I think he'll generate a lot more swing and miss, get more strikeouts, because that was a little bit of his detriment this past season, is he could get ahead in the count, but he couldn't strike anybody out. I mean, you got that 98, 99 sinker and a pitch you don't really throw in that slider or that changeup. Well, guys are going to be able to put the ball in play, and they can hit you hard. And at times he was hit pretty hard this past season. But when locating well, I mean, double play specialist, ground ball specialist, he's a strike thrower. That's a valuable piece of the bullpen, and a bullpen that needs to really improve in 2025 if they want to get to that 90 win mark or that 95 win mark and really have a good chance to win the division and get a bye in the first round. So with Angel Zerpa, like that he's generating trade interest. If I'm the Royals, I'm trying to leverage that and knowing teams would like to move him to the rotation instead of just keep him in the bullpen. But if you don't like the offer, as JJ Picollo said, we're not here to force anything. They have no need to just rush into a trade and give up somebody because they need to make a move, right? They can be very patient and relaxed when it comes to this. And if somebody does offer a great deal for Angel Zerpa, you got to know that relievers, which they do know this, relievers can be expendable from time to time. And Angel Zerpa was demoted, right before September. So it's not like you're talking about a Lucas Erceg in that bullpen. You're talking about somebody that hopefully you would feel confident in replacing in 2025. All right, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, find Locked On MLB as baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, it's going to be a Mailbag Friday, so get your questions in, and I'll have all your answers, but that'll be tomorrow. So until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.